Imagine, if you will, that you have a neighbor who once broke into your house, smashed all your fine china, killed your grandfather, and lived in your backyard for 15 years refusing to leave. That is essentially how the Roman Republic felt about Hannibal Barca. It's been nearly 2 decades since the Battle of Zama, where Scipio Africanus finally managed to beat the Carthaginian legend. You'd think the Romans would just pop some champagne, declare mission accomplished, and move on to oppressing other cultures. But no, Rome has zero chill. To them, Hannibal isn't just a defeated general, he is the literal boogeyman. He is the reason Roman senators check under their beds before going to sleep. But here's the funny part. Hannibal actually tried to go legit. After the war, he went back to Carthage and got a job as a suffete. Basically, he became the mayor. And because Hannibal is a genius at literally everything he touches, he was actually a really good mayor. He cracked down on corruption, balanced the budget, and made the rich oligarchs actually pay their taxes. Naturally, the corrupt Carthaginian elite hated this. They were losing money because Hannibal was too competent. So, in a move that historians technically classify as a total dick move, they wrote a letter to Rome saying, "Hey, remember that guy you hate? He's totally plotting to invade you again. Just trust us." Rome, who is already looking for any excuse to ruin Hannibal's day, immediately sent a commission to arrest him. Hannibal, realizing that his own country was about to FedEx him to his executioners, decided it was time for a career change. So, Hannibal becomes the ancient world's most dangerous couch surfer. He heads east, looking for anyone crazy enough to hire an unemployed general whose resume lists almost destroyed Rome as a special skill. He eventually lands at the court of Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire. Now, Antiochus called himself the Great, which is usually a red flag. It's like when a guy calls himself alpha male in his Twitter bio, you just know he's going to be a disappointment. But Antiochus hated Rome too, so they bonded over drinks and shared trauma. Hannibal, being the tactical genius that he is, immediately lays out a master plan. He tells the king, "Look, give me an army and a fleet. I'll land in Italy, stir up trouble, and hit them where they live. It's the only way to beat them. Trust me, I've done this before." It was brilliant, it was logical, it was the only way to win. Naturally, Antiochus ignored him completely. Instead of listening to the literal god of war standing in his living room, Antiochus decided to invade Greece with a tiny, underwhelming army because he wanted to look cool in front of his new girlfriends. He essentially hired Gordon Ramsay to run his kitchen, and then told him to just microwave some frozen nuggets. To add insult to injury, he gave Hannibal, a man who mastered cavalry and infantry tactics, a job commanding a small naval fleet. Unsurprisingly, things went south. In 190 BC, at the Battle of Magnesia, the Romans absolutely steamrolled Antiochus. The Great King's army was annihilated, and part of the peace treaty involved, you guessed it, handing over Hannibal to the Romans. Time to pack the bindle again. Being the world's most wanted man is exhausting. It's hard to book an Airbnb when your face is on wanted dead or alive posters in every tavern from Spain to Syria. Hannibal needed a pit stop, so he pulled into the island of Crete. Now, the Cretans were famous for 2 things, being excellent archers and being incredibly greedy. The moment Hannibal stepped off the boat, the locals looked at his luggage the way a cartoon wolf looks at a sheep. They knew he was carrying the Barca family fortune. Hannibal, realizing he was about to be robbed by an entire island, decided to pull an Ocean's 11 move. He took several large clay jars, filled them with lead and trash, and sprinkled just a tiny layer of gold coins on top. He dumped these jars in the Temple of Diana and told the Cretan elders, "Please, guard my life savings while I nap." While the locals were busy guarding jars of garbage, Hannibal hollowed out his bronze statues, stuffed his actual gold inside them, threw them over his shoulder, and walked right out the front door. By the time the Cretans realized they were guarding fancy trash cans, Hannibal was already waving from the deck of a ship headed to Bithynia. He finally arrived in Bithynia, a kingdom run by Prusias I. Prusias was, well, let's be nice and say he wasn't the sharpest gladius in the armory. He was a nervous wreck of a king, who was currently losing a war against King Eumenes II of Pergamon. Since Eumenes was best friends with Rome, Hannibal figured, the enemy of my enemy is my boss, and offered his services. Prusias, desperate and sweating profusely, hired him immediately. But he had a problem. His navy was tiny, and Eumenes had a massive fleet. Hannibal looked at the pitiful Bithynian boats and grinned. "Don't worry," he said. "I need you to go into the forest and catch me every snake you can find." If you think modern biological warfare is scary, Imagine being a sailor in 190 BC and having an angry viper thrown at your face. This was Hannibal's master plan. The Bithynian soldiers were, understandably, confused. Usually, when a general prepares for battle, he asks for spears, shields, or maybe some extra arrows. Hannibal asked for pottery and reptiles. The fleet of King Eumenes II approached. They outnumbered Prusias' fleet heavily. Eumenes, standing on his flagship, looked at the Bithynian ships and laughed. He probably made a joke about how cute their little boats were. But Hannibal had given his men one specific instruction: ignore everyone else. Just throw the pots at the ship with the fancy flag. The pots crashed onto the decks of the Pergamene ships. At first, the enemy sailors were amused. Oh look, they probably thought. They're throwing their kitchenware at us. How tragic. Then the pots shattered, and out slithered hundreds of highly agitated venomous vipers, who were very upset about being stuffed in jars for 3 hours. The deck turned into a mosh pit of scales and fangs. It was absolute chaos. You can't fight a naval battle when you are busy doing the "get it off me" dance. Eumenes' sailors panicked. The formation broke, and the mighty Pergamene fleet fled from a bunch of pottery. Hannibal had won again. He had taken a losing hand and slapped the enemy across the face with it. For a brief moment, it felt like the good old days. But unfortunately for Hannibal, winning battles attracts attention, and attention was the one thing he couldn't afford. It seems the Roman Senate had a mystical sixth sense, a specialized fun detector that started flashing red violently whenever Hannibal Barca was having a good day. King Eumenes, still nursing his bruised ego and snake bites, went crying to the Roman Senate. "Mom! Dad! Hannibal threw reptiles at me! Make him stop!" Rome, naturally, was furious. Not because of the snakes, honestly. They probably respected the creativity, but because Hannibal was winning. Again, the boogeyman was back in business, and that simply would not do. Enter Titus Quinctius Flamininus. Flamininus was Rome's premier diplomat to the east. He was the guy you sent when you wanted to threaten a kingdom while smiling politely. In 183 BC, he arrived at the court of King Prusias with a very simple message. He didn't bring an army. He didn't bring a fleet. He brought the implication. The conversation likely went something like this. "Lovely Palace Prusias. Nice drapes. Be a shame if a few dozen legions showed up and burned it to the ground because you're harboring a known terrorist." Prusias stammered, hospitality laws? Sacred guest?" Flamininus likely smiled and said, "Oops, my hand slipped. Just like your crown might slip. Give us the one-eyed guy, and we stay friends." Prusias, whose spine was made of cooked spaghetti, folded immediately. He was terrified of Rome. He decided that the sacred laws of hospitality were more like guidelines anyway. He agreed to betray the greatest military mind in history to save his own skin. The deal was done. The legions weren't coming to fight a war, they were coming to pick up a prisoner. Now, Hannibal Barca didn't survive fighting Rome for 20 years by being naive. He knew King Prusias had the moral backbone of a chocolate eclair left in the sun. He knew that eventually, the king would sell him out for a pat on the head and a Roman treaty. So, Hannibal had turned his villa at Labissa into a paranoid survivalist's dream home. He constructed 7 secret tunnels leading out of the house in different directions. Basically, his house was less retirement villa and more Swiss cheese of escape routes. But on that fateful morning in 183 BC, Hannibal noticed something suspicious. Perhaps it was the unnatural silence of the birds, or perhaps it was the loud clanking of several hundred Roman soldiers surrounding his lawn. He called his servant and said, "Go check the back door," the one hidden behind the fake bush. The servant ran off and returned pale as a sheet. "Bad news, boss. There are Romans there." "Okay," Hannibal said, keeping his cool. "Check the secret tunnel in the wine cellar." "Romans there too, sir." "The trap door under the rug?" "Romans? The chimney?" The servant pointed to the fireplace. Prusias hadn't just betrayed him. He had given the Romans the blueprints. The king had soldiers guarding every single bolt hole, rat tunnel, and window. The greatest escape artist of the ancient world was finally boxed in. Hannibal turned from the window. He didn't panic. He didn't scream. He simply realized that the game of cat and mouse, which had spanned the entire Mediterranean and lasted nearly 40 years, had finally run out of math. Hannibal sat down in his favorite chair. He wasn't afraid of death. He was a man who had spent his entire adult life trying to get stabbed, trampled, or drowned for a living. Death was an old friend. What he was afraid of, or rather, what he refused to tolerate, was being turned into a circus act. You see, the Romans had this charming little tradition called a triumph. If they captured you alive, they wouldn't just kill you. Oh no. That would be too efficient. They would drag you back to Rome, put you in heavy chains, and march you through the streets while the entire city threw rotten vegetables at you and shouted, "Who's the loser now?" After the parade, they would drag you to the Tullianum, a damp, dark dungeon that smelled like feet and despair, and strangle you while everyone else went to the after party. It was humiliation, industrialized. Hannibal Barca, the son of the Thunderbolt, the scourge of Rome, was not going to go out like a punk. He wasn't going to give Flamininus the selfie opportunity he so desperately craved. He called for the poison. Legends differ on where he kept it. Some say he had a vial hidden in his clothes. The coolest version, and therefore the one we are going with, is that he kept the poison inside a hollow gemstone on his ring. He had been wearing his own death on his finger for years, literally shaking hands with his mortality every single day. He looked at the servants weeping around him. "Chill out, guys," he probably didn't say, but implied. "I'm not surrendering. I'm just leaving the game before the referee can blow the whistle." He poured a cup of wine. The soldiers outside were banging on the doors now, demanding he come out with his hands up. It was time for one last toast. With the Roman battering ram thumping against his front door like a heartbeat, Hannibal prepared his final speech. And frankly, it is the greatest mic drop in the history of antiquity. He didn't cry. He didn't beg the gods for mercy. He simply looked at the poison swirling in his cup, swirled it around like a fine vintage, and delivered a line dripping with 60 years of sarcasm. "Let us release the Romans from their long anxiety," he said, his voice probably sounding like gravel and disdain, "since they think it too long to wait for the death of an old man." Let's break that down. He's essentially saying, you guys are so pathetic and terrified of a 6'4" senior citizen that you can't even wait for nature to take its course. You chased me across 3 continents because you're still wetting the bed thinking about Cannae. He was calling the Roman Empire a bunch of stage 5 clingers who couldn't handle the breakup. He mocked Flamininus too. He noted that the Romans of the past, men like Scipio Africanus, had warned him before attacking. But these new Romans, they were just debt collectors with swords. This is not a great victory for Flamininus, he mused. To drive an unarmed old man to suicide? Wow, big hero, put that on your resume. Then, without hesitation, Hannibal Barca drank the poison. There was no theatrical gasping, no dramatic monologue about lost loves. He just downed it like a shot of bad tequila at 2 a.m. He chose the time. He chose the place. And most importantly, he chose the exit. Outside, the Romans finally smashed the door down. They rushed in, expecting to drag the demon of Carthage out in chains. Instead, they found a quiet, lifeless body. The boogeyman had left the building. When Flamininus and his soldiers finally stormed the room, the mood wasn't triumphant. It was awkward. Imagine planning a massive surprise party, buying all the balloons, inviting everyone you know, and then finding out the birthday boy left town 3 hours ago. That was the vibe. They stood over the body of the man who had haunted their nightmares for 40 years. And they didn't feel brave. They felt cheated. There would be no parade, no triumph, no crowds cheering as the great beast was dragged through the forum. Hannibal had denied them the final satisfaction. Even in death, he had outmaneuvered them one last time. It was the ultimate tactical withdrawal. But here is the truly poetic part of history, the kind of coincidence that makes you think the writers of reality are being a bit too on the nose. In or around that very same year, 183 BC, another man died in exile. Scipio Africanus, Rome's greatest enemy and Rome's greatest hero, died almost simultaneously. And ironically, they both died hating Rome. Scipio, the man who saved the Republic, had been hounded out of the city by jealous politicians on trumped-up corruption charges. He died alone, leaving instructions that his body should not be buried in Rome. His epitaph read, "Ungrateful fatherland, you will not even have my bones." With these 2 titans gone, the golden age of honorable warfare was officially over. The era of genius moves and mutual respect was dead. The era of bullying, bureaucracy, and brute force had begun. Rome was safe, yes, but it was also a little bit smaller, a little bit meaner, and a whole lot more boring. So, Rome finally got what it wanted. The boogeyman was dead. The Hannibal problem was solved. Surely, the Romans could now sleep soundly, lower their blood pressure, and go back to being a normal, well-adjusted republic. Spoiler alert, they absolutely did not. Hannibal Barca had traumatized the Roman psyche so deeply that he essentially became a permanent resident in their collective subconscious. For centuries afterwards, whenever a disaster struck or a barbarian looked at them funny, the Romans would scream, "Hannibal at portas!" Or Hannibal is at the gates. It became the Roman equivalent of a jump scare. Roman mothers used it to terrify their children into eating their vegetables. Rome never really got over him. In their quest to ensure a Hannibal could never happen again, Rome turned into a paranoid, militaristic bully. They went back to Carthage a few decades later, in 146 BC, just to double-tap the corpse, burning the city to the ground and selling everyone into slavery. They essentially became the monster they accused Hannibal of being. But here is the ultimate irony. Hannibal lost the war, but he won history. Today, nobody builds statues of Varro or Flamininus, but military academies around the world still teach the Battle of Cannae. Napoleon, Wellington, and Patton all fanboyed over Hannibal. He is the patron saint of underdogs and the undisputed king of strategy. He proved that with enough genius, enough grit, and enough spite, you can make the world's greatest superpower check under its bed for the rest of eternity. So, the next time you feel overwhelmed by a massive, unbeatable problem, just remember Hannibal Barca. He didn't win in the end, but he sure made the problem sweat for 15 years. And sometimes, that's victory enough.